All right, welcome back, everybody. If everybody could grab a seat, we are about to start our next panel on DeFi, a very non-controversial subject. An excellent panel here today, led by Eleanor, Terrett. We have Ben Sherwin with Chainlink Labs. We have Shailee with Stacks, Bill Hughes with Consensys, and Neha with MIT. I'll now turn it on over to Eleanor. Take it away.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. This is such a cool building. I've never been here before. A little bit different to Amazon HQ, if you guys were here yesterday. A little bit different of a vibe, but I'm liking it. So yeah, let's kick us off. We're going to be talking about DeFi today, or as I like to say, the plumbing of crypto. Maybe not a cute thing to say, but it's kind of what I say. Anyway, so we'll go down the line. I'm going to start, Ben, with you. You work for Chainlink, obviously. Oracles are your thing. Can you kind of tell us what's going on? What's new with oracles? Anything new with oracles? I don't think so.
Am I on? There we go. So yeah, lots of going on. People think about oracles as data providers, and it really it goes beyond that. It goes about connectivity, interoperability, compute, and so we're seeing a lot of different ways to power decentralized protocols. One thing that recently came out is we have now publishing of data on chain. So S&P just recently is publishing their SA risk information so that people can use it on chain. And what these things do really is allow builders to use these different data elements to build and to increase. Because what we're seeing really in terms of DeFi is a move from just the nascent DeFi into scaling the protocols, and that requires different tools. And those tools, really rely on Oracle-based systems, and whether that's pushing data versus pulling data. So whether you're caring about speed versus cost. So there are different ways to do it, and it's continuing to evolve as the DeFi protocols evolve.
Shailee, you're at Stacks. What's new with Bitcoin DeFi over there? Bitcoin DeFi, maybe not a term that people are, DeFi, maybe not a term you think of like when you think of Bitcoin, right? Maybe building on top of the Bitcoin layer. But kind of tell us what's going on with Stacks. Anything new over there?
Yeah, so Stacks is a Bitcoin layer 2, and we're taking the security of Bitcoin, and we created a layer to make Bitcoin programmable in decentralized finance applications, or I should say dApps. So we have things like decentralized exchanges, lending, borrowing protocols, and Bitcoin-backed stablecoins, and an entire kind of like Bitcoin economy growing on Stacks. And the reason why this has become really exciting over the past year or so is that you have this emergence of digital asset treasury companies like MicroStrategy. They were the pioneers, accumulating a lot of Bitcoin, and they want to do something with that Bitcoin in decentralized finance using self-custodial wallets. So to earn yield, to use it as collateral for different purposes, and it's an exciting time to be in this space.
Okay, Bill, what's new with DeFi interfaces at Consensys?
Consensys makes MetaMask, and when I say DeFi interface, obviously if you go to any protocol, they'll have a front-end interface, a website, where you can attach a wallet and execute transactions using that protocol. I think the critical thing happening in DeFi with interfaces is what's happening with wallets, where it's like a general interface, which interops with basically all the protocols that you're going to ever want to use if you're engaging in anything Web3. We're in a race to make the interfaces as user-friendly as possible, as fun to use as possible, and as useful as possible. That means it's got to connect to every single protocol that people want to use. It's got to be intuitive. It's got to be safe. So that means If people are creating a blockchain account, it's got to be something simple, something that a normal person, non-Web3 nerd can actually handle. That means offering different options other than just the rote 12 or 24 seed generation way to create an account. And there are a lot of design choices which you have to make your app the one that everyone wants to use. I do think in the end there are going to be some apps that win, some interfaces that win. They have to connect to the networks that everyone is using. They have to connect to the L2s. They have to make everything on the back end very seamless, and that's what we're working hard on at MetaMask, and we're very excited about what the future holds in that regard.
Cool. And Neha, what's new at the MIT Media Lab?
Well, I think what's happening in DeFi right now is really interesting, especially with this weekend, obviously. Incredible moment in time. I'm teaching a class called Cryptocurrency Design and Engineering, and it's really fun to be able to go to the class and say, hey, who saw what happened this weekend? Who wants to explain it to us? We had some guests who were more experts in crypto market infrastructure. And I think, I look at it as growing pains. We are developing the framework for an alternate financial system, and we are getting to design it from scratch. That's happening out in the open with many protocols and services and approaches all competing, all experimenting and trying different things. Some of those things work, some of those things do not work. And it's very exciting. I think our role in academia is to kind of be this neutral actor who looks at everything that's happening, who's honest about it, who calls out, when things are not quite true or when there's some nuance, and to try to make sense of it for people, and to try to sort of act as almost like as a light that is illuminating what is happening in the space that is very exciting, very complicated. There's a lot of risks, but there are also ways to mitigate those risks. So trying to move forward.
That's really interesting. Actually, just want to touch on something you mentioned, like with your students. I mean, how many of them do you see like coming in and actually really understanding this space now? I mean, I feel like when I was in college, no one was talking about crypto, and nobody really understood any of this stuff. Bitcoin had barely, when did I graduate college? 2016, but when I went into college, it was 2011. So, kind of right around the time that Bitcoin was getting off the ground, no one was talking about it. Now with these kids, like, how are they kind of responding to this? Like, are they active traders? Like, what are you kind of seeing from your perspective as a professor?
Yeah, well, I'm not a professor, just to be clear, but research scientist.
Research scientist, sorry.
Teaching and whatnot, yes. So first of all, I think MIT is kind of unique. It's a very unique university to start with. Very technology focused, very all about, like we say mens et manus, so mind and hand. It's all about building, getting your hands dirty. I think that but I've been there for 9 years. Like 9 years ago, you had students mining in their dorm room. That's what you saw, right? You had people running miners, using the free electricity when they maybe weren't supposed to, because it was fun and interesting and they were trying things out. I remember when I was in grad school, someone was mining Litecoin. Yes, you had that kind of experimentation. Things are quite different now. Obviously, you can't really mine in a dorm room. And so you have people who come into it through trading, who come into it through hackathons. International students, I think it's particularly interesting. People from certain countries are coming to this because they've been in a place with really high inflation and they've experienced a lack of access to digital payments, to financial tools. And so they're coming at it from more of a mission-driven perspective, which I think is really interesting. And then also something else that I'm seeing is that, especially with where things like stablecoins and DeFi are now, people who might have normally been more attracted to traditional finance are like, oh, this stuff's getting really real now. It's connecting into the infrastructure of traditional finance. And so that excites them and that brings them into it. So lots of different views.
That's so interesting. I did want to touch just briefly on this notion of like stablecoin yield and kind of what we're seeing with the Genius Act. Bill, how do you kind of, like, just from an audience perspective or for the audience, like DeFi yield, I think is a little bit different to what we're seeing, or maybe it's not, but like with what's happening with the Genius Act, like what they're trying to do to restrict stablecoin yield and staking, what does that mean from, like a crypto native perspective? Like how is that really encroaching on, I guess, the freedoms of, being able to transact freely on a DeFi perspective, like, and how it really is giving a leg up to the banks. Like, can you kind of give the audience, like, from, where you sit at Consensys, like, what does this mean for the industry, and is it really just kind of choking off those freedoms?
Well, it's a non-starter. It's
Okay.
trying to retrade on Genius. There was a long conversation when the Genius Act was being discussed as to if you were issuing a stablecoin, meaning taking in a fiat dollar and giving a token in return, if you go invest that dollar in treasuries, can you share some of the yield on the treasury with the token holder as an incentivization mechanism, as a general sort of user feature? There was a lot of debate on it. Crypto thought you could. Genius Act says you can't. So what else can you use that stablecoin? Now you can use that stablecoin for anything in DeFi. They're now trying to change that. I understand bank lobby generally understands that in DeFi you can go lend that peer-to-peer using an on-chain tool and realize some yield by virtue of you engaging in that lending to someone else borrowing it. They say, well, we shouldn't allow that either. So imagine you have $1 in your pocket. It's analogous to a lobby saying the only way you should be able to earn sort of a return on that dollar is if you deposit it with me, the bank, and we'll give you just a pittance of a yield. But you shouldn't be able to go and lend that dollar to anybody else and get yield. That's equivalent. That's essentially what they're advocating now. Stablecoins are a killer app of crypto. They're putting a United States dollar in the hands of every single person on Earth who has an internet connection. And this lobby says, let's take one of the key features of that, allowing people to earn money on the money in their pocket, and let's make that illegal. I think that's just a non-starter. I think it's obvious. Like, I understand we're out here protecting consumers. We're worried about the integrity of deposits. What they leave out is that they're worried about the integrity of their business model. And I think people in the legislature, I think policymakers should really recognize all that's going on here. And so, yes, if there's going to be trillions of dollars of stablecoins in people's pockets around the world, they should be allowed to use independent protocols to allow their money to make money for them. And we can talk about how they need to be regulated and all that stuff. But to say it's categorically illegal is a fatally bad step.
Can I just add to that really quickly? 100% agree with Bill. I think we have to go back to some of the core principles of why decentralized finance kind of started and the whole cryptocurrency movement. It was to decentralize the existing power structures of banking, okay? It came out of the financial crisis. So we wanted more financial access for people without that central authority of what we have in the existing banking infrastructure. And we have to come up with a way for us to coexist, and you can't do that with regulations that are fair for some and not the others. And we want to work together with all the traditional finance actors, but there has to be some fairness in it all. DeFi has to be able to grow, and people have to be able to earn yield in DeFi without having a bank in the middle or any intermediaries that are, yeah.
Any thoughts, Ben?
Yeah, I think, and I agree with what was said. You're starting to see, DeFi players running ahead and innovating, and the more traditional banks are catching up. And I think we're seeing a time where we're going to get to some sort of confluence where there are just choices. There are better things for consumers, where consumers aren't at risk. If you want to use your tokens in a certain way, there's going to be a choice. There'll be some level of consumer protection, but let that develop over time and let it make sense for the actual risk that's attendant to it. And so a lot of that's dealt with in DeFi through transparency, through decentralized governance, but mostly about the fact that it's still traceable on chain. And as long as the rules are clear, people can use their money how they want. there are good reasons to use banks. There are good reasons to use brokers, and there's good reasons to use DeFi. And I think that they can all coexist, and they will and we'll see those rules develop over the next few years.
All right, let's move on to tokenized equities, because that's another massive use case in the DeFi space. And I did bring this up in my panel yesterday, but I can't keep bringing it up because I thought it was really interesting to hear Larry Fink, who kind of started out as a Bitcoin evangelist. I think he still is a Bitcoin evangelist, but now he seems to be the evangelist of tokenization as well. And I wrote about this in my newsletter yesterday. But if you believe what he's saying, I think in 10 years' time, everything, at least at BlackRock, everything's going to be tokenized in the next 10 years. So obviously this is getting major traction in Wall Street circles, but kind of like what does this look like from a DeFi perspective? So Ben, current trade reporting rules don't really fit neatly on chain at the moment. How can compliance be encoded into smart contracts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to see the ability to have decentralized compliance over time. There are really three elements to that. Identification, which will live off-chain and be trackable on-chain. The actual transaction, which that's easy. Identification still nascent. And then rules engines. We've got Chainlink automated compliance engine, which is aiming to do just that. I think in the interim period where ID and all these other factors are being developed, the ability to report isn't there yet. So I think what you'll see is this interregnum of intermediaries filling that role, and as things develop, you'll start seeing it be more decentralized, give more tools, develop so that it can move on, completely on chain, given the on chain off chain dichotomy of certain information like PII. So I think this is for somebody who lives the capital markets like I do, it's a really interesting time. I think things are moving onto blockchain rails, and but we're in early days, and I think this stuff is one of the reasons why I got into the space in the first place.
Bill, from the lawyer perspective, what should projects be? What should projects be kind of looking out for, maybe with guidance from the SEC when it comes to...
Yeah, I think we should expect some guidance from the SEC.
Yeah.
I think what you got from Commissioner Peirce was really potentially her only serious individual instance of, okay, pump the brakes, guys, and consider what you're doing. If you are wrapping essentially securities and then releasing them into the wild in DeFi, you're going to have what we haven't been able to get over the last 4 years is any sort of licensing or registration mechanism through which an entity could handle both securities and other things like crypto tokens. I think what you're going to get is through one of the many procedures or authorities of the SEC, a new type of entity or classification which allows you to do both, and then there's going to be guidelines on how you do both. And I think there's going to be guidelines on the types of wraps you can put around a security, where you can offer them, how you can offer them. But it's all horribly complicated, and I think it's going to take some time, but I would expect, hopefully in the next 6 months, you start to see some of that guidance coming out. And I will say, without naming names, there are plenty of players in the space who are focused on real-world assets and tokenization of financial instruments in particular, who are going ahead and getting ahead of the curve on getting registrations and talking to the SEC and other regulators about what the requirements will be and how to square away the paperwork so they can hit the ground running when a regime, at least the contours of a regime, are more publicly known. So this is coming, and I'd start getting ahead of it if this is an area that you want to play in.
Mm-hmm. And do you anticipate safe harbor sandboxes or more exemptive authority from the SEC?
All of it, but I think for the current iterations, I think exemptive authority, or it will manifest itself in, like, if you're going to be a BD or a transfer agent or any of these, like, this is how you qualify for that, but also add these different sort of functionalities or ability to handle and trade in certain assets.
I mean, there are certain rules that just need to be interpreted or tweaked in order to do things. In terms of transfer agent, we went and spoke to staff about the transfer agent rules and said, okay, well, if you are able to look at it this way, we can unlock innovation. And they said, great, and they gave guidance. And I think we'll see, as Bill's saying, that in various different areas where, from a policy perspective, from principles perspective, you can use the rules as they are and existing rails, legal rails, and just to say, hey, yeah, that's okay, so that the people that want to build the banks, the financial intermediaries, the DeFi protocols, have the comfort of doing it.
It's like the notion of like not having to reinvent the wheel type thing.
I mean, a lot of it's just there, and it's like, yeah, like this is the same thing, right? People moved from paper to computers to, we've done technological change without freaking out before, and we just need to, take that same approach. It's just technology.
There's one thing the Crypto Task Force and Commissioner Peirce and Chair Atkins says repeatedly, like no one's here to delete or completely redraft securities laws. The idea is that there's enough play in the joints that we can introduce these new technologies in a responsible way into what is now the traditional capital market system. Previous regime, utterly uninterested in doing that, in fact, thought it was horrific. This regime, clearly a different view, but it's like these laws and the interpretations, the SEC has incredible discretion over how these things are thought about and how it actually works. And they're being thoughtful about how we can evolve it within the regulatory contours, which are more the bones, to allow us to advance capital markets and how they work.
I was just going to say, at the protocol level, you already have token standards being developed and different, actors that want to launch these type of tokens coming together to discuss the token standards and like the integrations around that. So,
Can you? Oh, Neha, go ahead.
I was just going to offer like a slightly different view, and I want to encourage a level of intellectual honesty in terms of sometimes our existing regulation really isn't right. Like sometimes a new technology actually shows that existing regulation was making assumptions, like the existence of an intermediary or like the requirement to collect certain data or something like that, that just doesn't make sense anymore. And I totally understand not wanting to rewrite all of US securities regulation. That is a daunting, arduous task, and industry just wants to move forward, and they want to build cool products, and they want to innovate, and they want to make users' lives better, and I get that. But I also think we need to create the space for conversations that ask the hard questions of, does this even still make sense? If we could do it all over again, would we still do it this way? And have some kind of space where we can discuss that, and we're not afraid to discuss that. And I think that'll get us to a better place.
I'm just picturing you standing behind Gary Gensler in the line at the cafeteria, getting for lunch, just biting your lip to like tap him on the shoulder.
Do you see him at MIT?
Yeah, Gary took the first iteration of our class in 2018. That's where he learned a lot about how cryptocurrencies and blockchains work.
Yeah.
I take no responsibility for. We're all independent people who make our own choices and have our own views. There's several things that I agree with Gary on. There's several things that I disagree with Gary on.
Do you see him there now? Because I know he's back there, right?
Not as much. No.
Okay, gotcha. Do you think we are starting to have those conversations where, like, sort of those safe spaces? Maybe those, like, are we getting to that point?
Yes,
Have those started?
I was just at the DC Privacy Summit, where I think we were having some of those conversations around privacy. Commissioner Peirce gave an excellent speech a few months ago on thinking about privacy in this new world. So I'm very optimistic, and I think, truth be told, it's great that the new administration is creating a space to have the conversations and to talk about this, and people clearly feel less afraid. So I think that's step one, is safe space. So,
and it's the regulators need to have conversations with the industry. It is a need for them to do their job. They find it very useful. I would say notice and comment takes 6 to 9 months, if you're lucky, and people are ready to innovate now. And I think that's why we're seeing, as Bill suggested, that you're seeing incremental guidance given so the industry can move ahead. One of the main goals of the SEC is for facilitation of capital formation. It's not, and investor protection. And everybody wants these things in this industry. Rewriting the rules takes a lot of time. I think there's a lot of things that over time will fall away just because they develop. But I think the period that we're seeing now is the shift over, and that shift will be gradual. And as people say, like, well, nobody does this anymore. Nobody actually uses this intermediary because they use a smart contract. So we don't really need this rule. A lot of rules that exist in the securities laws today, they're just not used anymore. But where something says paper and they made it, you could use digital, and now you can use blockchain, like those are just incremental steps, that the same principles-based stuff. I think they're low-hanging fruit.
Shailee, for some reason I'm like trying to picture like tokenized equities on Bitcoin layer. Like, that's a thing, right? With stacks, you guys make that possible?
It is possible. We are thinking through what the token standard would look like on stacks, and we've actually talked to a few partners globally that want to see this come to fruition. We are not quite as far down the line on talking to regulators, so would love to have that conversation, although I'm not a lawyer, so it should probably not be with me. I do growth, like ecosystem growth. But yeah, I mean, it's possible, and we would love to have that. And I agree with Neha, like, it's really hard to IPO as a business. Why not launch a token instead? And, it's easier, faster. It would be awesome to be able to rethink what it is to launch a business in this day and age without all the compliance burdens, because many of you work for these businesses where it's just, how difficult it is to get to the IPO level.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I feel like there are a lot of crypto companies coming to market though, coming to IPO at the moment. So clearly there is appetite to come to market, to tap the public markets. But I don't know, maybe that's something to tap into. Ben, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of capital formation, generally the U.S. public markets are the best place, in my opinion, to raise capital. You have investor protection rules that provide a foundation for more traditional equity raise. And that's what I used to do for years. That was my career up until I got into this space. And you have a burden, though, when you're raising that much capital in from retail investors, you have a burden, a regulatory burden, because that's what we've decided in terms of our balance of investor protection versus capital formation. I think you're seeing a shift with this space. Some of it is more hopeful than real, I think, in terms of, well, this is different, and a lot of it isn't. When you're fundraising, there's concerns. I think there needs to be a path for private raise of capital where it's harder to raise capital, and there are more restrictions around who you raise it from, but you should still be able to do that. It shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all in terms of how you raise capital. I think hopefully that's going to be worked out through market structure, through SEC guidance, and the like. But IPOs are powerful. They're great marketing. It's a pain in the neck for a CFO who's got to report quarterly, but maybe it's going to be biannually someday.
And these are big, centralized companies. A lot of exchanges have come to market. But I don't know, Bill, would Consensys ever consider an IPO?
No comment.
Fair enough. All right, well, let's talk about market structure then, because I feel like that's maybe the elephant in the room, right? It's like, are we getting this done? Are we not getting this done? And how does this affect DeFi? Does it affect DeFi if there is a market structure bill or not? Let's kind of go down the line. Ben, I mean, where are we, a year from now if there's no Clarity Act? I know Clarity Act is the House's version, but also the Senate is also doing their own bill. TBD whether it gets done by the end of the year. But if we somehow get to this same point, next year and there is no bill, is DeFi still in the same spot as it is now? I mean, it's made it this far, right? Sort of what are the implications that you're looking for, kind of where market structure is concerned?
Well, this isn't a loaded one. Thank you for this question.
You're welcome.
No, so
I've got many more.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. So first of all, I'd say the efforts by both the House and Senate, there's a tremendous amount of work being done, tremendous amount of care, and applaud them for the efforts here. It is just very complicated to do, and I think we just need the patience to do it. Creating broad bipartisan support in an environment as such as today is also messy. So you're sort of, juggling on a unicycle with, flaming batons. So, applaud them for the efforts, and I think, they can get it done. Part of it is just getting a fundamental understanding of DeFi and understanding what it actually means, as opposed to, throwing out your broad-based criticisms of how it works and how it doesn't work. I think that there's been a pretty mature view within the traditional financial markets towards DeFi, and I think that'll spread over time. And but ultimately, DeFi will be fine. It will survive, and it will grow because people want to do it. And there's a market demand for it. I hope that demand remains in the United States as well as everywhere else. I don't see any signs that it's being driven off. I'm hopeful, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. Could there be maybe like a shadow market structure bill kind of going on behind the scenes if we don't get a real one? Bill, I'll give you that one.
No, there's no shadow bill. No, if I'm still bullish. The people trying to pull it together, including the White House, when you bet against them in previous instances, you've lost. So there's lots of reason to be hopeful. I think if one doesn't happen, you have Chairman Atkins and Hester Peirce at the SEC coordinating a regulatory response to update the status quo in ways which continue us to be aggressive on the innovation curve. I think the big stumbling block with market structure, yes, it is complex generally. The general criticism has always been like, nobody understands this bill. It's like, well, that's fine. We can try to educate on it, but the learning curve is always going to be steep. The policy problem appears to be how one handles illicit finance in DeFi. And generally the Republican versions, they are pretty good, although they do it differently, on putting their finger on what constitutes decentralized. Like, how do we separate traditional structures from these new crypto structures? It generally has to do with like the level of control one person or a group of people have over a particular piece of technology. But those bills generally sort of say, for DeFi, let's analyze it, deliberate on it. To the extent there's going to be legislative pronouncements on it, we're going to wait till later, after more education. The recent Democratic proposal from a group of Democratic senators, including some who have been holding themselves out and I think sincere to a large degree as being like pro-crypto generally and pro-innovation. The proposal was very much akin to what in 2023, if memory serves, was the Cansey Act, which was Senator Reid and Rounds and Warner and Romney, basically saying, in the United States, we're going to have a whitelist DeFi, meaning that all of DeFi in the United States is going to be permissioned, and we're going to place the burden on a variety of different actors to ensure it's permissioned. That means it's completely gate-kept, and anybody acting in it as a service provider, like an interface provider, is going to be treated like a financial institution. That is obviously the antithesis of where DeFi views itself as being, and as a matter of process, I think it prejudges it both in both meanings of that term. I think it actually prejudices DeFi like materially, meaning it sort of takes away a lot of its promise to dictate that as America's approach to it, but it also prejudges the issue in that it prescribes a regulatory solution without the CFTC or SEC really getting their hands in, and Treasury for that matter, who's in charge of policing illicit finance, at least from a policy perspective. So I think the Republican solutions are more sensible on this. This is going to be a gatekeeping mechanism to see whether we can even bring this forward in committee. The dichotomy between banking and ag and the House Finance and the House Ag Committee, that can be worked out, but I think that this is a central issue of policy which needs to be resolved, and it's going to be hard.
I should have been more clear on my original question. The shadow bill I meant that would kind of be more of like like a shadow enforcement. Like we don't get a market structure bill with some like provisions on DeFi. Like could that?
The biggest mistake I see people seeing, and our devs come to the legal department all the time and ask me like, well, so this is going to be, I'm building this and we think it's compliant with the Clarity Act because, I'm like, guys, the Clarity Act isn't law. Like we don't know what precisely the rules are going to be, nor do we know necessarily the standards and guidance and thresholds that Clarity Act prescribes are going to, or let alone like how the SEC and CFTC are even going to apply those in terms of like a rule structure. So people are doing the best they can, to build given the signs, but there's going to be no back way to legislate this. I think we're ultimately going to get market structure legislation. It is ultimately going to look something like Clarity or what Senate Banking put together, and we just need a core set of Senate Democrats to. There needs to be some resolution as to what to do about this AML issue with DeFi, and then we can proceed. And then it's just a logistics thing. Is there enough time in the calendar for this year, or enough time in the first 4 to 5 months next year? And I'm not going to handicap that, but I'm optimistic.
But these are the tough questions, right? We regulate intermediaries. You talked about reporting earlier, trade reporting, and like intermediaries do that. And so in a world where you don't have intermediaries, what do you do? It's a fundamental question and one that's very, very hard. We're seeing tools develop where you can solve for that. And in terms of Treasury, they've done a great job. And the SEC. So you're seeing engagement on the regulator side to try to understand how to fill that gap. I think everybody's interested in providing some level of.
Yeah, I mean, one more thought. DeFi is not scared about building into a regulatory vacuum, especially in an environment where it's been made clear we're not going to haul you to the stockade for breaking some rule which isn't sufficiently clear. What DeFi builders are terrified of is being beaten by the next guy who's also building. Right. Regulation is like 4th or 5th in your stacked ranked risks if you're trying to succeed in this business. Like being the lead in the industry for whatever you're building is number 1, and it's cutthroat. And so, yes, we're going to continue to build, and there's going to continue to be an incredible risk appetite. And yet we should want a regulatory scheme in place so people can accommodate it as they're doing this. But the longer we wait,
but there's that fear of
there's going to be no slowing down. There's going to be no slowing down.
regulation by criminal prosecution, like we saw with Roman Storm.
We can get into that if you'd like.
Yeah, I was going to say, just really quickly, speaking from the builder perspective, there are still a lot of businesses that can't afford a Bill Hughes on their team. That are.
I'm a big value. I'm a steal.
I used to work with him, so I could say awesome. But we do have builders that are creating applications that are not available to U.S. citizens today. And I think many of us may have participated in an airdrop for one of our favorite apps. And then it's like, people might be using VPNs. I mean, this stuff is happening in DeFi, and let's not turn a blind eye to it. So like Bill said, people are moving very quickly at building, and getting the best user experience, but they might not make their applications available to U.S. citizens during this, like, without the bill, without some clarity.
I feel like we could go on for another 30 minutes, but I know we're running out of time. Neha, I do want to ask you, have any of your work at MIT included like any objective like metrics for assessing like how decentralized a protocol can be? Are there any metrics that could like objectively assess that?
So I'm going to be honest. I get really worried when I hear about trying to encode definitions of decentralization into the law of the United States. I get very afraid of this, and I mean, all of you may be regulatory policy experts here. I am very much not. Like, the clarity stuff is not the Genius Act 2.0. Genius Act was pretty simple, I think. Like, relatively, you can get your head around it. Back your coin by treasuries. The market structure stuff is way more complicated. There's a lot more going on here. There's a lot of other concerns to think about, a lot more detail, and I don't have a full grasp of all of it. But I remember many years ago, attempts by regulators and policymakers to define decentralization. Are you decentralized enough? What are the metrics? Guess what? Those metrics are all gameable. We're not going to think of all of them a priori. That I just want to be honest about that. That doesn't mean that we can't make progress, we can't move forward. I think, look, if there is an actor who has a fair amount of control, then that actor should be regulated as the laws dictate. That's just the simple fact of the matter. That's how it should work. That's the principle that we should be thinking about. If there's a company that collects money from an ICO, if there's a foundation that employs all the developers who work on something and they control the governance of a protocol, they control what gets pushed out, they control what users see and do, they can fork the code, they can change balances. I think we need to acknowledge this type of level of control, and you can't just sort of make this argument, oh, there's 100 validators, or there's 1 million validators, and we don't know who they are. Guess what? They know who they are. It's like, this stuff is so hard. You can't just like define a priori, what it means to be decentralized. And I think we have a lot of the tools we need to look at, is there an actor or set of actors who have control? Now, that said, I think it's incredibly important that we don't punish developers simply for writing software, right? There are some other principles on the other side of that we need to make sure that we adhere to. But I think trying to define this stuff, I think regulators and policymakers trying to define this stuff really frightens me, really scares me, because the technology is changing so fast as well. We're going to come up with a whole new consensus mechanism in 6 months or a year. It's going to work completely differently. So you can't enshrine this stuff into law. I get really worried. And something that I've been thinking about as I've been hearing people speak, I remember, someone said to me once, like, surgeon, if you're a surgeon, the answer to any medical problem is you got to cut into the person. That's the way surgeons think, right? And if you're a technologist, the answer is you build some software to fix the problem. If you're a lawyer, a certain kind of lawyer, the answer is you go to court, you sue, you do this, you do whatever. If you're a policymaker, it's to write policy, right? And so I think we need to remember that actually there's many different ways to go about fixing something. And everybody's kind of coming from their own angle and sees their way as the solution to fix things. I remember, learning about financial history and the first stock market in the UK. They actually had to shut down stock issuance for like decades. Because it turned into this crazy free-for-all of scammy stocks. Like, people were just, I don't remember if this was the 1600s or 1700s or 1800s, but people were just issuing stocks for everything, and it was a nightmare, and you couldn't figure out what to do. And they were just like, just shut it down, no more stock issuance, right? Like, regulation is important. We need to get this right. We need to set the rules of the game correctly. So I'm not sure where I was going with that, but there's just all of this stuff is incredibly important. I'm listening to you all talk about it, and I'm realizing there's a lot of challenges. But I don't know if enshrining technical definitions in law is the right way to go.
I love it. Just to wrap it up, really rapid fire. Where in DeFi should we be paying attention to in the next 12 months, Ben?
Rapid
fire.
Yeah, rapid fire. I know exactly. Pass.
I'll go. There's an existential question as to whether peer-to-peer payments should even be allowed in an unsupervised fashion. And so I think we're at the, crypto is calling a broader question as to whether we accept pervasive financial surveillance on everything we do, or whether we should be granted some long-standing privileges, freedoms, and privacy. And I think it's existential to DeFi and a lot of what crypto is supposed to stand for. So I think that plays out over the next 12 months.
Shailee?
Not financial advice, but check out the dual stacking white paper on Stacks. We're launching a dual staking product where you can earn Bitcoin yield / rewards. I don't know what I'm allowed to say. Yeah, check it out.
Ben?
Yeah, so I would say focus on the tools DeFi is using for consumers as the front ends get more interesting, where it's less developer focused in terms of and more consumer focused. It's going to be an exciting time where people can interact with these protocols more easily.
Cool.
So.
Neha?
Yeah, I guess I would say try to remember what we got into this for. There's going to be a lot of large financial institutions. They're already coming in. There's going to be more, right? Now that there's more clarity, now that things are okay, going to be a lot of large balance sheets coming in. And I think to the builders, to the people working on this who got into this for mission-driven reasons, like remember those reasons. Remember what we're trying to do, and don't just recreate the existing financial structure on top of a new rails.
Cool. And for me, check out Crypto in America podcast and newsletter. That's all.
Awesome.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists. A quick note on lunch. It's a bit decentralized, second floor and fifth floor. So this stage will kick back off at 2 p.m. So thank you all.